Can you say a little bit about the inspiration for doing a documentary, how that came to be, and then a little bit about what the experience of putting this documentary out in the world has been as a project?
Yeah. Yeah, so making the documentary was definitely not my idea. That was other people's ideas. And Zach was one of a few directors that reached out to me that wanted to make a documentary. And I told him no initially. I told everyone no initially. And then he was just very persistent. And he kept asking me, like, oh, what can I do to, like, to get you to do this? And it's like, oh, you should make a how-to video for me. And he showed up the next day and we filmed it. And it was a lot of work to do that. And he turned it around in like 24 hours once we finished filming. And it was a nice time doing that with him. And I said, all right, yeah, sure, you can film. Yeah.
And how's the reception been of the documentary?
It's been overwhelmingly positive. I've been kind of sad actually that I haven't been able to speak to many hecklers, I guess. Like I think it's like, oh, it's like you're so whatever, it's like amazing, this and that. It's like I really value like negative opinions, I think. Honestly, very honestly, yeah.
So speaking of negative opinions, there's a clear turn that happens early on in the film where the city starts as potentially wanting to partner and then pretty quickly moves to a more legalistic, oppositional approach. Why do you think that is? And I think Alana can also maybe speak a little bit as to why she thinks that is, given her work in with housing and homelessness supports for so many years.
I just think there's a lot of disconnection between the different departments in the city of Toronto, and I guess that was just another example of that, where there's one staff thinking, oh yeah, this is going to be a great idea, I'm going to bring it back to my superiors, this is going to work out, and then them having a completely different take, or like not communicating between departments and having different interactions. And yeah, that's what I sort of see that as. Yeah.
Thanks. Can you hear me? I think one of the things that I've come to realize with the city is that, similar to what you're saying, Khaleel, is that there's always one department that thinks your idea is really super great, and then somewhere else there's a bylaw, right? And as I was watching the film and I was thinking about marijuana. Strange enough, it's like it was not okay, but once they could profit from it, if you look at $1.9 million just for clearing, right? And we could have bought probably 2 buildings, right, that we can house vulnerable populations and have support in there. But I think your actions really highlighted how big of a problem that was. And so this Section 5 was like, let's take it out from the public view, right? And I don't think people realize, even before COVID, how much homelessness there is in the city of Toronto. And there's a lot of hidden homelessness. And the same folks who are saying, we want the city to do something, they just don't want it in their backyard, right? And so that continues to happen. And so the city, if you look at who voted yes and no, and I'm gonna have to shout at Councillor Fletcher because she's always maintained that there is an issue in regards to homelessness and let's do something, right? Few councillors are willing to really stand up and say, we have a problem, let's fix it.
So building off of that, you mentioned in the film, Khaleel, that other cities are doing similar projects, like embracing these tiny homes or tiny shelters as a interim solution to people sleeping rough outdoors. Why is Toronto so hostile to this type of work?
Well, I mean, the way that I did it, I did not ask for permission before I started putting them in places. I just saw that people could use them, and I started dropping it off, and then sort of wanted to talk to them afterward, or was forced to. So that probably had a role to play in that. And I guess, and it's also interesting because of what I was building. It's like a sleeping pod, and this is I guess there's examples of that in a few cities in Germany that I've seen at that time during the film, in the film. But I guess at this point there's different projects that are kind of similar in the same vein, but they're much more substantial. So they're like providing like cabins that you can stand up in that are like 8 by 12 feet, that have electricity, that have washrooms, that have laundry, and like basically all the facilities you need. And you're seeing more of these projects popping up all over Ontario, and it's been common in the States for literally decades. And I think Canada is just catching on to, yeah, these new ways of, meeting people where they're at and housing them. And so that's sort of the work I'm carrying on right now. I have a shirt, 2 steps home, 2 steps home, and yeah. So I'm working with a team right now with architects and engineers, and we are moving that work forward at this point. And yeah, and it looks like it's being successful in Hamilton, it's successful in Peterborough and Kitchener, and these are municipalities that are endorsing this sort of model already. They already had, like, in Kitchener, they've had the same project for about 4 years. And yeah, so I think it's something that is being endorsed now, but it's slow. It's a very slow, long process.
And is there any conversation at the City of Toronto with that project?
And I guess I can't speak to that. I can speak to what is public, which is they are doing a report coming out April 30th on this model, on the tiny home community model that 2 Steps Home is working on. So they're coming out with a report April 30th talking about, all right, is this a viable solution? Is this cheaper than, what we're spending on shelter hotels, which is ridiculous. It's like, what is it? There's 17 shelter hotels operating right now, housing 2,200 people, and that's costing around $300 million a year. And it's yeah, and I guess that's been the case for the last few years since the pandemic, and it's overwhelmingly expensive. And then you look at the solution that we're recommending. We estimate that it's going to be 2.5 million to house 50 people, and it's not permanent housing. This is transitional, and it's the same case with the shelter hotel, but much more effective in terms of like providing people with the needs that they actually have, and yeah, making an environment that caters to that. But yeah, yeah.
So the pandemic plays a particular role in the story as it's presented in the documentary. I wonder if, Alana, you can say a little bit about housing and homelessness challenges in the city present day. So as if, in some ways, I think the pandemic highlighted some things, but it certainly didn't create the conditions of the need for this type of shelter. So what are things? What do you see as the current situation in the city today?
You know, I think that question is so layered, David, because I always go back to in 2009 when the financial crisis happened. We started seeing a lot of encampment. Encampments are not new to the city. I just think how they continue to manage it is an interesting one, right? We've had situations where there was tent city, and they moved folks out. But most times, folks get moved out, but they're not situated in a permanent situation where they have the supports to be successful. So people return to the streets, and we're not talking about that. And so what you're seeing now is a lot of displacement, right? So folks have been evicted from encampments. And I'm not saying encampments are the safest place, but what I'm saying is that encampments addresses a need, because I always believe everyone can be housed. And where can they be housed? Where can people be safe in that moment, right? When you hear someone say in the movie where it says, like, I made it through 4 months, right? And so where she went into the park thinking, I'm not going to make it, it's like there's a sense of hope now that surfaced for her. And that's the reality for many individuals. And so you're finding that there's a lot of displaced people, and where do they go, right? Where do they go? We're just kind of forcing more people into car parks. I recently went into an underground car park, and I was surprised to see how many homeless individuals are sleeping there just in tiny corners. And you kind of have to look good, because by the time the night falls, the only thing is the slight shifting, right? Like you have people like really crouched up. And then you'll start to hear people saying, it's a safety issue, so what are we going to do? Take away parking lots because now homeless people are in there? If we look at what's happening with bus shelters, right? A couple years ago, the TTC added a bar so that individuals could not stay for a long time, right? But again, folks have found ways. If you can't be at the library, right? If you can't, so you're seeing more and more homeless individuals or individuals who may not identify as homeless, but certainly have no place to call their own at night. And I have to tell you, as a housing worker for many years, and I'll always see myself as a housing worker, there are some really good shelters, but I could probably name 5, right? And the city has a lot of shelters. Shelters are not always the best place, right? Like, you lose your belongings, you can get assaulted. There's so many things that happen at a shelter, and there's so much that workers can do to protect individuals who are vulnerable, who themselves also feel vulnerable in shelter spaces, right? So when we're talking about who we're seeing and what we're seeing, I think the situation has gotten, we have a pandemic, and we're not saying that homelessness is an epidemic yet, right? And we're not doing anything about it.
So I'm conscious of time. So we have roving mics. If you have a question, one of the volunteers will bring a mic over. Please speak into the mic. I'm guilty of this. Please speak into the mic so everybody can hear you, and also the folks that are recording will be recording it as well. So just hand here. We'll get you.
Hi Khaleel, this is Umair. First off, thank you for presenting such great work.
So you just put it as close to your.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Hi Khaleel. First off, thank you for presenting such great work. My original question has already been asked by about the 2 correspondents for the City of Toronto. My other question basically is, what kept you going during such difficult interactions and hurdles? I could understand where you're coming from, because I work for a charity organization, and I get to visit shelter homes and have one-to-one conversations with clients who are facing homelessness. But I just wanted to hear it from you, like what kept you going, what was your driving factor?
Yeah, for sure. For me, I guess during the building of the tiny shelters, it was definitely momentum. It was just waking up and just having things that I had to do that I knew were important to do, and just doing those things literally up until I could not, and then sleeping and then doing that again. And that kept me going. And then when I had to stop, that was a very difficult period of time. And I disappeared for maybe 8 months, almost a year. And then I guess I really wanted to do something. I really missed the feeling of actually having an impact, and not just wanting to do something that disappears, wanting to have a lasting impact, and feeling like that was very possible. And now I guess I'm working with this team. We've been meeting every week. We meet like 5 times a week for like the last 2 years now, and I guess we're just talking to contractors and getting budgets together, and like working out like what sort of design makes sense for someone that's, might be overdosing, and like what sort of relationships do we want to have in this community to make sure that it works for people, that we're meeting people where they're at. Yeah.
I've never been homeless, but I really want to congratulate Taka. I don't know how you found her, but I think she is an amazing woman, amazingly erudite, well aware of her reality, and able to express it succinctly and marvelously poetically. And I want someone to say thank you to her.
I just wanted to ask, with the new mayor in town, okay, have you talked to her about your two-house step program? Is she getting involved, or is it the same, oh, we'll spend another $300 million keeping them in hotels and another $2 million to kick them out of the parks? Or is she actually helping you people?
So it's difficult. I should not be talking about private conversations, I guess, which is terrible. It sounds terrible to say that, but yeah, we feel really positive, but ultimately we're waiting for that report coming out in April to know what their actual stance is. But so far it feels very positive with the people that we have connected with.
Well, thank you, and I, it's just better man than me.
Hello? Hi, I was just wondering.
Yeah.
Hello?
Yeah.
I'm audible? Thank you. Through the experience with dealing with the encampments, did you notice a sense of agency that was growing in the inhabitants of these areas? Because it takes a lot of innovation to even set up a tent, to perhaps build their own structure, and I'm wondering if this was a paradigm shift in the way that we see shelter.
And I mean, there's just like,
Sure, I guess it's a longer room than I thought.
you have to really speak into the.
Okay, hello. Is this better? Yeah. So my question was that through the experience of having these encampments in our city, if it really changed the paradigm in which we contextualize shelter and the inhabitants of it, if they felt empowered and had a sense of agency in how they chose to live.
To my understanding, I guess there's been many encampments and many encampment clearings literally for decades. Like in early 2000, there was a huge tent city that one person on my team, John Van Nostrand, was working with those folks to try to figure out a solution very similar to what we're working on now, and felt very hopeful working with Jack Layton. And that did get crushed. That project did get crushed, and they cleared the encampment. They literally moved bulldozers in the same day you were supposed to be having a meeting with one of the counselors, and I think that was a shocking moment for him. And yeah, and I mean, as soon as you see an encampment, it's automatically like, yeah, it takes quite a bit of like, right, like, I am allowed to exist on this planet. I'm allowed to exist here, and I have to figure out how that's going to work for me. And so there's lots of ingenuity instantly. It's like just figuring out where you're going to shower and getting food, and, you know, just managing resources and relationships and developing relationships with the folks nearby. It's like, all right, can you watch my stuff? I'm going to be gone for like a day or two. Like, do you have my back? And it's like this sort of thing. It instantly develops, and like, you know, if you're walking by it, you don't notice that. There's so many things that you do not notice, and yeah, I guess it's been a learning experience for me, for sure. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, Khaleel. You said that you don't consider yourself an activist. When you started out, you were just, I guess, a simple carpenter who wanted to help bring shelter to homeless people in the park. Where are you right now? Do you, I mean, having gone through the process, do you see yourself now in 2024 now? All right? Do you think you're now an activist?
I hate that word. I don't like that word. And it's like, why should you be considered? And it's like, when you hear the word activist, you think it's like, oh, like, you're really going all out to do this thing. It's like it's to me it's like synonymous with an extremist in a way, but it's positive. And it's like, and I hate that because it's like, why should it be considered this extreme thing to be reasonable, to do something that's reasonable? And yeah, why is it an extreme thing? And it's like, I don't think that word should be used for people that are doing things that make sense. I think it should be normalized. I think it should be just like, oh, that's just what a citizen is. It's like they just do things that help people because naturally that's what we want to do. And it's, finding more pathways for that to happen seems like a good idea. And making it normal to not do that, I think, is a very terrible, myth, I guess, that we get to carry with us, and we can relax, look at our phone, see things happening around us, not care. But it's like, being involved, I think, is actually a very positive thing, or at least like as involved as you feel to be. And yeah, I just don't like the idea of it being an extreme thing to do.
That's a good point. And I think that in terms of you making that clear, I think it really helps you to be more authentic in yourself in regards to what motivates you, what drives you, what gives you a sense of integrity in regards to the work that you're doing. And I think that it flourishes through not only the film, but also in your personality and how you conduct yourself in regards to people who have very little. Because it really says a lot about a person when they can treat those who have less or nothing the same way they treat those who have a lot. And I think that it's incredible the way you're juxtaposed the two. I'm curious to know, Alana, because I'm coming to you. You're looking very comfortable, very relaxed, which is good. There's been conversations about policies that include a sense of restriction, a sense of prohibition, a sense of what can be wrong and right about doing something. But this new conversation about policy is also about having caring integrated within policy making and compassion and understanding. I'm curious to know from your experience and also from your vision, do you see us, or how do you see us, integrating compassion and caring into the kind of policies, bylaws that we create in order to serve the public rather than ones that are simply there to build more obstacles for those who are less fortunate?
Yeah, and I guess I don't quite, and it is weird, I guess. I don't quite see like policy being very caring. I think the best we can hope for is that it's fair to me. And it's like, I don't expect like people getting hired to be outreach workers, all of them to be like, I'm going to give my entire life to like making sure that everyone I interact with is having an amazing day. I think those are special people that feel it in themselves to be able to do that. And it's, I meet those people and it's like, you're amazing. It's like, you just emit love. And it's like, for me, it's like, I'm not even that kind of person myself. It's like, I like to do things, I like to think of myself as a reasonable person. And it's like, oh, I just do things that are reasonable. So that's my perspective. And it's like, to me, the policies around like trying to make this situation better, it's like, it's always disconnected. I feel like the dots are not being connected where it's like, oh, homelessness is increasing, we should build more shelters. It's like, why are people becoming homeless? And it's like, you look at some of the research that the city is doing, it's like there's a streets needs assessment report that's done every few years. They interview like 2,000 people that are unhoused about like, why are you homeless? Like, how long have you been homeless? How long have you lived in Toronto? This sort of thing. And it's like overwhelmed. Like the major reason is I could not afford my rent. And it's like, all right, so what policies are keeping rents or making rents go up and up and up, which has been ridiculous. It's like year over year, it's like 20% increases on average rent in Toronto. That's like, why is that normal? It's like you invest in a cryptocurrency and you hope for this sort of gain. It's like, why is investing in housing so lucrative? And it's like connecting the dots. It's like, all right, let's look at like why that's happening. It's like one reason is not having rent control. Since Doug Ford been in office, there has been no rent control. So any new building built after 2018, it's like, right, you can raise the rent whatever you want without without applying for an application. Usually you have to apply for an above guideline increase in rent to raise rent above what is controlled, which is 2.5%, 2% usually. But we're seeing an average increase over the last 2 years of 20%. So it's like, right, so how the hell is that possible if this is the level that you're allowed to increase it by? So these like managers of real estate properties are exploiting that. They're exploiting that to increase their profits, and that's obviously making more and more people homeless. And it's insane how you can have, politicians talking about, oh yeah, there's a housing crisis. Like, we need to do something about it. We need to build more shelters. We need to put more cots together in the same room. We need to open up space and not talk about we need rent control. Like, that seems much more fundamental. And I think as soon as you start to figure out the affordable housing problem, it's like you instantly solve homelessness, or you solve a large portion of it. And instead of being forced to live in a tent, to cope with the trauma that you've experienced, it's like you get to get drunk and high in your house. But yeah, that one didn't land. But terrible. But yeah, and I think there are there's a few key specific policies that are, like, in Hamilton recently, a group called Acorn managed to help pass a bylaw in Hamilton to get bylaws around rent evictions, to like protect tenants that are being kicked out of their places. And as soon as they get kicked out, the place is being renovated, and then a new tenant is coming in. And because there's no vacancy control as well, not just there's no rent control after 2018, you can have an older apartment building. If you renovate it, kick the person out, when the space is vacant, you can raise the rent however much you want. And that is an incentive for people that own property to maximize their profits from their rental units. And this is being exploited, and people are being kicked out of their places. And there's a group called Acorn that was really pushing to do that, and they're huge. 170,000 people organization, national. I didn't know that. I joined one of their meetings the other day. It was on Monday. There was 110 people in this meeting, and they're talking about, oh yeah, February 21st, like, day of housing action. What are we gonna do? I recommended that everyone just set up a flash encampment at Queen's Park. And it's like, this is ultimately the conclusion of these policies. Like, you want this to happen if you don't change this. And to me, that seems like a great message. They didn't like the idea, I don't think. But yeah, there's a few key policies, and that's provincial. Municipally, I think, there's lots of renovations being approved. And it's like, again, it's like Hamilton passed the bylaws to protect people from being rent-evicted. How come we're not doing that yet? And that's something municipally our councillors can do right now. And I think that should happen, and we should get rent control. And yeah, like, everything should be done to keep people in their houses, because that's the easiest way to deal with homelessness, like not letting people become homeless. Because as soon as you become homeless, it's like you're introduced to so many experiences that like keep you there. And that's a different problem, and that's a much more difficult problem. And you're seeing people that have never been homeless, like, experiencing terrible things. It's like, right, like, how hard is it gonna be for you to get back into like living a life that you think is reasonable? It's like, I don't know. So more can be done now. So, yeah.
I guess to also add to that, in terms of can policy be caring, I guess that was the question. I could tell you I won't get a job as a policymaker. Most times the folks who are working in policy related to ending homelessness, specifically here in Toronto, they have never visited a shelter, many of them. There's a lot happening. So for example, in May 2024, for rooming houses, I've been doing some work with rooming houses, and rooming houses are going to have more rules and regulations attached to it. And I can tell you that the 5 policymakers that came into the rooming house, that I currently operate had never been in a rooming house, right? Yet this policy was passed, this bylaw made it into council, and everything is changing for rooming house, which means that there'll be displacements based on some of the rules. So then where is the care, right? So there's a disconnect because the folks who are writing the policies are not close to the issue, right? So how can they have any kind of real empathy and compassion in terms of when I write a policy, I'm going to ensure that there isn't an impact, right? Everything that they write at City Hall has an impact on vulnerable populations. And so that's where the disconnect is. And so then it's left to the workers on the ground to push those policies back, but it's already gone, right? And so that's where we are in terms of the policy and having care.
Hi, Khaleel. I think that you have demonstrated this bravery and all of, in all of what you've done. And I just want to say, just as a side, that a flash encampment on Queen's Park, that's activist, okay? That's deeply activist. And I hope also that your mom is feeling a little better with you now where you are. I wanted to ask about the refugees that had come in the summer, last summer, and were sleeping out on the ground, and the churches had to go in and rescue some of them. Is that part of your consideration in what you're looking at for Toronto?
In terms of the team I'm working with now?
Yes, for the homes for those folks, because they...
Yeah, and I guess it isn't, I guess our main focus was people that are dealing with mental health issues and addictions that have been homeless in Toronto for a longer period of time. And I think, it's just a completely different set of needs in terms of, refugee populations do not have the same needs as people that have been using fentanyl every day for 2 years. It's generally very different. And and I guess there's been churches taking in many refugees, but it's strange that it's come down to churches having to open up their basements to let people stay in. And it is, and I think that's a federal government responsibility as well. That's very disconnected at the moment, but I don't know enough about that situation myself to talk more about it.
Hi, Khaleel. Amazing work, very inspiring. I just have two questions, I guess, technical questions, just about the sandwich in terms of, for the structure, in terms of keeping it warm but also being fireproof.
You're talking about the tiny shelter?
Yes, the design. Yeah. And I guess the follow-up is how far the design has come, like the changes till now, if you can speak about that.
So I guess the idea was 2x6 walls with I guess just standard fiberglass insulation, and I guess that was R22, and then having R10 on the outside with rock wool, and I guess with the rock wool it's fire resistant, so it'd make it much more resistant to fires, and you end up with something that's close to R35, and because of the size of the space, I guess originally I used I used like a furnace BTU measurer. So it's like, all right, like what size furnace would you need for a building with this wall assembly of this size? And I reversed that to find out what would be reasonable for your own body heat to heat up in -20. And and that seemed like a reasonable size to not need a lot of heat, a lot of additional heat to keep it warm. And so that's sort of how I figured out the design for the tiny shelter. With the cabins that we're building, it's just much bigger. They're all gonna be wired with electricity, so we're gonna have heaters, we're gonna have an HRV, there's gonna be constant fresh air in the unit. So it's a very different design. I don't think we're focusing as much on, we have to make it like R50 to make sure the heat stays in there, just because it's gonna be heated, but we are trying our best to make it efficient. Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Khaleel and Alana. I would say firstly to Khaleel, thank you so much. Thank you, Alana. I would say, Khaleel, you're not an activist, but an advocate. Advocate. Advocacy. My question is to Alana. With immigration and the policies surrounding immigration, wouldn't the city, I would say, have the city consulted you in any way before they bring in anyone that for immigration? Have they consulted with you? Because with immigration, you have to have housing, and with housing comes immigration. So you have to have somewhere to put people before you bring them in. And I would say there can never be a solution with assumptions. You can't assume that bring people in and give them housing. You have to solve the problem before you bring people in, because then homelessness will forever be on the doorstep of Toronto.
Thank you so much. Now I have to be like Khaleel and wonder, these are my views, simply because it's funny you're asking that. So I was not consulted, but today I had the pleasure of meeting with someone from the refugee response team within the city of Toronto, trying to figure out how I can support their efforts. So I don't want to say too much because I don't want to harm my chances of potentially, and I've been on the receiving end of this, where I say something in public and I would have prior to gotten some kind of approval, if you will, and then that approval gets pulled back because my opinion is not that of the city of Toronto. So I was not consulted. However, I do think we have responsibility as citizens, and so in knowing there are so many arms doing things for immigration and refugees, I thought, let me see where I can insert myself to make a difference. And if it works, then certainly I'm happy to report back. But it's such a layered issue at the moment, right? And I think we're thinking about the refugees that we're seeing right now. There's refugees that came 4 years ago, 5 years ago, that are still stuck in homeless shelters, right? And so we also have to think about that. The numbers are staggering, and so it's a bigger issue, and there needs to be folks at the table who want to make an impact. I think I was even saying to David today that the amount of folks they consult with, by the time, and the amount of reports that are written, by the time that 1.5 million that was allocated to the service, you're kind of ending up with like 300,000, right? And what can you do? What kind of impact can you do at that point? And so I think there needs to be more intentional collaboration. I don't know how much reports, I mean, Khaleel, you seem like you've read a lot. I have gotten to a place like, and another one, right? There's another report saying the same thing. The same reports that came out from the street needs assessment when it first happened, probably about 12 years ago, it's not much different. We're still hearing the same stories. As you said, I couldn't pay my rent. Something happened. One incident occurred. I lost my job. There's a breakdown in family, right? I'm experiencing mental health issues, and I don't know how to get support. I couldn't manage anymore. And there starts their journey into homelessness. And so for every person that was living in those insulated boxes, there's a story from where they came from. And until we address those stories, we're not going to solve homelessness in Toronto.
So I hate to do this, but conscious of time, this is going to be the last question.
Hi, I had a question for Alana. So often a lot of care services and institutions and shelters, they're overcrowded, they're expensive, they rob people of dignity, and they don't feel safe. It seems like shelters like this offer people more agency and dignity. So I guess my question is, what tangible ways do you imagine that structured, city-funded institutions can change to center folks' dignity, keep giving them dignity, basically?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm going to defer to Australia. I had the opportunity to meet with David Pearson, who does a lot of work in ending homelessness in Australia. And when he came to meet with me about a year ago, I said, how are you managing homelessness? Like, what does your shelter look like? And he said, Alana, every shelter became a single unit, right? So they ended the business of sheltering and converted all their shelter spaces into self-contained units, right? And so I think we need to get out of the business of sheltering. If we're going to use hotel spaces, convert those spaces to bachelor apartments so that people can have agency and a sense of dignity. I think that's where we need to go to, yeah.
Thank you both. We're going to have a few words from one of Alana's students, right? And
hello, everyone. Can you hear me? All right, so my name is Andy. Before we conclude today's event, I would like to thank everyone for joining us in this screening and the panel. I would also love to thank Mr. Seivwright, Professor Jones, for sharing their expertise and insights on this pressing issues of homelessness in Toronto. I have always thought that homelessness is an issue that is very abstract and detached from my daily life. However, just like Professor Jones talked about in our classes, it is actually happening pretty close to us. Luckily for me, I have a place to go back to every day after my classes. However, apparently there are peers that don't have a place to stay at night, and they have to work double, maybe sometimes even triple shift in order to find shelter, and then which highly affect their mental and physical health as well as their academic ability. Homelessness is a crisis affecting all levels of society, and it is crucial for us to find a solution to alleviate the harm it is causing. It is a great experience today to learn from social workers such as Mr. Seivwright and Professor Jones to see the potential of innovative solutions such as tiny shelters Mr. Seivwright has created in the documentary, and how it can alleviate the homelessness crisis that we face today. Again, I would like to thank the filmmakers for shedding light on this growing issue, and thank everyone for coming tonight. Thank you.
So just a couple of quick announcements, but before I do, I see that Khaleel is resisting any labels. So I will simply say that he says he's a normal person. If this were normal, the world would be an entirely different place.